Ken, what's the word on Matt Carpenter? Did we get that right? He gets league minimum with St. Louis?
That's right. And the way his contract works is just how you described it, Scott. He's getting paid, I believe, by both the Padres and the Braves, and it gets him up to the 5.5 million that he's guaranteed for this year. So no problem there. And you're right. For the Cardinals, it's a low risk kind of thing. Whether Matt Carpenter can play or not, that remains to be seen. Still play. So if he can, all good. And this will be a good deal for the Cardinals to have a good bench player like Carpenter. And if not, there's really no risk financially at all. And you can always replace him once the season begins or after the season begins.
I think some Cardinals fans might be looking too deeply into this, Ken, because of the outfield logjam that they've had. So they're like, why are they doing this? We have an infield logjam. Matt Carpenter's not starting 150 games. Right. And if anything, even based on what he did last year, I mean, he could come off the bench for an at-bat or two. If two infielders suddenly go down, he could get more playing time. As we all know,
goes
do we
to camp,
to do the depth
Scott.
Reminder?
Exactly right. He goes to camp. If he can't play, you release him, no big deal. If he can play, you keep him on the bench, you use him in different spots. It's not like anything to get excited about one way or the other if you're a Cardinals fan.
Fair. All right, so this is much more exciting in my mind. Do you actually think that the Houston Astros would shell out significant money to blow past the luxury tax number, to spend like they usually don't spend in free agency and sign Josh Hader, who even if he doesn't get the 5 years, 105 or whatever it is to surpass Edwin Diaz, it's not like he signed him for $30-40 million. I mean, I would imagine he's at least going to get 70 or 80.
I would agree. And obviously, if the Astros intend to do this, it would be a bit out of character. This is not a team that generally goes into the free agent market and grabs players for top dollar. They did it with Abreu last year, but it's not their style. They have spent money, of course, but mostly on extensions. Bregman, Altuve, Yordan Alvarez, that kind of thing. They're in an interesting place as an organization. Bregman and Altuve are eligible for free agency at the end of this season. Verlander as well. You have kind of a state of transition and maybe in Jim Crane's mind, a situation where we need to go for it now because the team is going to look different, not just next year in 2025, but beyond. Tucker and Valdez are free agents at some point. Ryan Presley, he can have a vesting option to get him another season after this one, but it's all kind of in play for them, all of these different things. So for the Astros, if you're Jim Crane, maybe, and I don't know this for a fact, but maybe you're thinking, okay, let's go in on Hader and let's try to max out on this thing while we still can. The question I would have, and the question that a lot of people would have is, well, why spend that amount of money on a closer when you've still got other relievers out there who could supplement your bullpen in front of Presley, when you can still sign Blake Snell if you want to spend big money to maybe a 3-year deal, if you can do that, pull it off, or do something else with that money. That's a lot of money to tie into a reliever. Josh Hader obviously is perhaps the best closer in the game. But when you already have a closer and quite an accomplished one at that, it would be a curious move. But it is something that they are definitely looking at. And the way we wrote it was they're making a push, and that is how we understand it to be.
Is this a ploy because it just so happens that 2 or 3 days ago, Hector Neris said he would like $50 million. Could this be a ploy to get Hector Neris' prices down? Or is this something I mentioned earlier in the show? My theory is they're going to have to start going all in for people. They're going to have to extend Tucker. They're going to have to pay for whoever is going to replace Bregman because they don't have those pieces in the minor leagues anymore. Could this be the start of, hey, you know what? Look what we have for the next 5 years. We have a closer. Come sign here. Bregman, come back. Altuve, sign another extension. Tucker, sign another extension. All of a sudden, it's the same team.
I don't believe it's a ploy with Neris. I don't see that, Eric. They can sign Robert Stevenson, who might be as good as Neris. He's younger for sure, not the same kind of track record, of course. So I don't see it as playing games with Hector Neris. If you want Josh Hader, you want Josh Hader. The other aspect of it is, to me, more realistic. The idea that you're putting an anchor down with Hader and building a team in front of him, of course, because he's the ninth inning guy. Again, I don't know how this is all going to play out. Jim Crane is a very involved owner. Obviously, he's been that way for quite some time and became even more that way after the scandal with the sign stealing and all of that. He has his own ideas, and we've seen him execute his own ideas, and this might be one of them. We'll see if it comes to pass, and then we'll see what they do first with Altuve and Bregman, then with Tucker and Valdez, how all of these things, all of these pieces are going to eventually fit together.
Let me ask you this. You brought up a couple names in free agency. It seems like right now there's just like a lull going on right now. Nobody's signing anybody. There's still a lot of top free agents out there. Um, can you put your head to it? And is this like a head scratcher right now? Is this the way baseball's been going? 10, 15 years ago, free agents were going like hotcakes, and now it's just like a different ball game. Is there anything to it? Is it money? Is it, people don't want anybody anymore? Like, what do you got in your mind? You think this is why there's such a big lull and everybody waits until the end to sign some of these big free agents?
Todd, it's an interesting question. It's one we've all been thinking about. Obviously, you had the Otani holdup, the Yamamoto holdup. You have these regional sports networks that are creating uncertainty for teams because they don't know what their revenues are going to be in 2024 and beyond. There are a lot of excuses, a lot of reasons. Some trades that we thought would be made have not been made. I can't put my finger on it exactly. It's probably all of the above to some extent. And I did talk on Fair Territory about the 175 free agents and how maybe a deadline would push things along more. Some kind of deadline, maybe 2 deadlines, however you want to frame it. And after that, I received a call from an agent who explained to me why the union and agents are so opposed to a deadline. And basically what he said was that we've seen what owners did when they put a deadline on draft pick signings. They squeeze players. We see what they do in arbitration where there's a deadline, they squeeze players. And this agent believes, and a lot of others do as well, and a lot of union officials do as well, that a deadline would only serve to restrict the market. And the union is opposed to all kinds of restrictions, any kind of restriction on the open market. They are opposed to a salary cap, of course. So I don't see a deadline happening anytime soon. This is the way it's going to be. My question is this way a great way for players? Also, okay, you have Bellinger and Chapman and Snell and Montgomery. They're still going to do really well. Hader's going to do really well. But there is a large middle class that is getting squeezed anyway. And those are the guys that maybe the union is never going to worry that much about, or at least not as much as the guys on the top end. You guys could speak to this better than me. But that is where my concern is, and I'm not sure the system works for those guys the way it should. And maybe that's the way it ought to be. Maybe it's just a top end kind of thing, and that's the way talent works in all industries. But that's the question I have about it.
Yeah, and my thing is, some have brought up the year that Harper and Machado signed very late, Ken, and I thought it was terrible for the sport. I think stretching out free agency and trades for a while is cool. Like, gives us something to talk about all offseason. But when guys are signing in February or even March, everyone moves on. It's like it's spring training time. So you kind of lost your opportunity for the sport to kind of get some attention there, in my mind. And as we can see here, this was a good job by the Cespedes dudes. The top 50 free agents unsigned last year were Profar, Chafin, and Waka at this point last season. Look at the list right now of what's available. We keep talking about like 4 or 5 guys. This is crazy.
I should mention one other fact here, and it's Scott Boras. There's no question about it. Scott Boras has Snell, Montgomery, Matt Chapman, and Cody Bellinger, as well as Rhys Hoskins, James Paxton, and a few others, Hyunjin Ryu. Scott Boras, like him or dislike him, think one way or another about him, he is not afraid to protract these negotiations, to extend them to the point where he believes is necessary to get top dollar. That's a factor here. And I don't know that you can blame him. We'll see how these deals work out. But that is certainly something that is part of this equation. It was part of the equation with Harper, too. Machado was represented by Dan Lozano. It's a different agency. But Boras repeatedly has shown over the years that he will take this thing as long as he believes it's necessary to get the deal he wants. And sometimes he will not get the deal he wants.
And he has the top of the line guys. What you hit on, I want to make sure everybody hears what you hit on, is something that I remember bringing up to the union a long time ago. The union thinks about the guys who are at the top, And the teams know where the majority of their money is going. Everybody wants Garrett Cole. Everybody wants Shohei Ohtani. They'll pay for those guys. Baseball, I feel like, has squashed that middle tier player, and it's kind of what Todd hits on all the time. These guys don't get to sign. How can this change? How can we make sure that the middle tier guys are not forgotten because they're big league players? Aroldis Chapman is a big league player. Rhys Hoskins is a big league player. Rhys might even be at the top because he's coming off an injury. He could be a top guy. But how can we, as a game, take care of those 85% of the players that aren't rookies, that aren't the elite? How can we take care of them? Because to me, that's where the game grows exponentially, when those guys get their contracts, their time in the spotlight, all that stuff.
I'm not sure, Eric. And if you put a deadline in, those are precisely the guys who would get squeezed under those circumstances too. So I don't know what the answer is. And certainly this has been an ongoing concern of players over the years. Players like yourself, players like Todd, who were not necessarily top of the line, but like you said, are competent, qualified, accomplished major leaguers. And again, to some degree, a lot of industries work like this, right? But that's the one concern I have as we look at this. I'll be repeating myself here. It's those guys. And we'll see how it works out for some of the players. You mentioned Aroldis Chapman being one, Hoskins being another. Hoskins is a little bit different. He'll probably get a pillow contract of some type somewhere. But there are a number of players. Let's look at Adam Duvall. Let's look at Michael Lorenzen, James Paxton, Robert Stevenson. These are all guys who are pretty accomplished, and yet they're still out there. Maybe some of them will get paid. I believe some of them will. But there will be players. There always are players who get the short end of the stick, and there are also players who are always weeded out of the system. I mentioned 175 free agents. That's what the number was a week ago or so. There are always some free agents who simply don't play again, and that's the natural course of events. That's Darwinian, if you want to call it that. That's going to happen. But again, it's the middle class that sometimes, in my mind, also, guys, gets overlooked.
Ken, I'm going to give you one fan question. It's also kind of about state of the game. So I might butcher the name here. Raikia says, Jays keep hiring coaches to their staff. Is there an MLB limit to allow how many coaches to be in the dugout? I know the San Francisco Giants, remember, in 2021 got a lot of love. They had so many coaches, and they were like, oh, maybe this is the future. And then obviously they had that one great year. I actually also thought of how there was discussions at one point about the league kind of limiting how much teams can spend or do to kind of also create some type of like pseudo salary cap on clubs like the Giants, Dodgers, Yankees, etc., from having more resources than other teams. So, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but what do you think? And do you know anything about how that works?
There is a limit to how many coaches can be in uniform in the dugout. I believe it's 7. It might be 8. I'm not exactly sure. But it's not as if you can have 50 coaches in the dugout. That doesn't happen. It can't happen. Before the game, on the field, different story. But once the game begins in the dugout, there is a limit. As for putting a cap on coaching salaries or anything like that, my gosh, these guys already are underpaid. There doesn't need to be a cap on coaches' salaries. And I should say guys and women because there are female coaches now. So that idea to me is wrong-headed and kind of preposterous. If anything, I'd be paying coaches and managers more.
And let's finish with this. So I know you covered this a bit in fair territory, but what is the plan for the Angels now that they lose Shohei Ohtani? And you never know. I mean, Art could just wake up one morning and be like, okay, screw it. Let's get Chapman or let's get Blake Snell, whatever, right? And I know you talked about how they don't spend on pitching in the past. Like at this point, is this a team that should be kind of rebuilding to an extent? I mean, not necessarily tanking, but they're in a weird spot. The division's really tough. They clearly don't have enough talent to compete, even if they do buy one or even two players. So not only what is the plan, but what should they be doing?
Well, first of all, they're looking at everything. Trades, free agency, pitchers, hitters, relievers, starters. They're trying to kind of improve the team any way they can, and I expect they're going to make moves. They're not going to be quiet the entire offseason. They want to compete, and maybe that's to a fault at this point. Maybe they should trade Trout and do things along the lines of rebuilding, but that's not the way they're going to go. They believe that their position club is actually pretty good, especially if it stays healthy. If you get Trout and Rendon on the field for more than you did in the last year or so. Okay, I can see that. They're certainly going to need insurance for Rendon at third base and some additional protection, but they like their position club for the most part. Where they can upgrade probably with more of an impact is maybe in their bullpen and maybe even in their rotation, though they like some of those pitchers that they have there too. In fact, they're kind of deep. If you go back 2 years, they were pretty good as a starting staff. I believe they were 7th in the American League in ERA. Now, it's not entirely the same cast, but it's largely the same cast. So I expect them to make some moves that are going to help them better compete in 2024. But again, it still comes back to the health of Trout and Rendon. If those guys are healthy, different club.
Yep, fair. And you can learn more about what's going on there on Fair Territory. Ken, we appreciate it. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, you guys too.
Thank you. And yeah, let's show it. There it is. So the Angels are covered. So is Albert Pujols, former Angel, by the way.
Yeah.
A little inside dish. It's a great story from Ken. It's
that
inside
story.
baseball. It's inside baseball media. Highly recommended to zoom into that one too. And then, of course, he gets into free agent talk at the top, a little Juan Soto action, and plenty more. Really great 30 minutes there for you on YouTube or wherever you get your pods.